That night, everything fell apart for Yetunde when Ayodele came home very angry. Without asking any questions, he accused Yetunde of ruining his evening, yelling that she was useless and couldn't handle anything on her own. Yetunde, feeling a mix of fear, tried to explain Damilare's condition, but Ayodele wasn't listening. Instead, he shouted at her and even began to beat her. In the village of Akinro, Ayodele is a tall, dark-skinned man known for his success as a trader who sells materials and also has a shop that sells so many food ingredients. He was kind but had a short temper that could flare up unexpectedly. Yetunde is a young woman who had lost both of her parents, had only one brother who was married, and she lived with her grandmother. She was known for her cooking skills and beauty. Ayodele and Yetunde met at Ayodele's food shop as Yetunde was his frequent customer. Over time, Ayodele began to develop feelings for Yetunde and decided to ask her out on a date. He nervously asked if she would be interested, unsure of her response. Yetunde, sitting across from him, could sense his sincerity. Though she hadn't thought of him romantically before, she was moved by his warmth and kindness, so she smiled and agreed to go out with him, curious to see where it might lead. The couple quickly grew close, and with time, their feelings for each other deepened. They fell in love more and more each day, and it became clear to both of them that they were meant to be together. Confident in their love, they decided to get married, which was a simple and beautiful union in the village hall that the whole of Akinro celebrated as their whole family gathered. Yetunde had always thought her life was perfect when she married Ayodele. Their relationship was everything they had hoped for, filled with laughter, shared dreams, and promises of forever. Ayodele often told Yetunde how lucky he felt to have her, praising her beauty, kindness, and lively spirit. They had a simple but joyful wedding, and both dreamed of a future together. Ayodele was especially fond of Yetunde's cooking, with everyone who tasted it commenting that her hands worked magic in the kitchen. They enjoyed a happy life together, celebrating every moment. When Yetunde became pregnant, their joy doubled, and they felt as though their dreams were coming true. Ayodele was incredibly happy when he found out they were going to have a baby. He took great care of Yetunde. He showered her with love, care, and support, excitedly telling anyone who would listen that he was about to become a father. 9 months later, they welcomed their baby boy, Damilare, into their world. Ayodele was filled with pride and joy, and he worked hard to be a good father, caring for their baby with love and attention. The family members of both couples came over to celebrate their baby. Yetunde's brother's wife, Simi, helped Yetunde a lot in the care of her baby till Yetunde was able to do it herself. Yetunde was filled with joy, seeing how happy Ayodele and their family were. But being a mother brought challenges she hadn't expected. The sleepless nights, the constant care a newborn needed, and the stress after childbirth began to take their toll on her. A year passed and Yetunde gained weight and found herself heavier than before. Her once slim body now carried the signs of her new role as a mother. She also began to feel less confidence about her appearance. Despite the joy of having Damilare, the demands of motherhood made her feel tired and unsure of herself. At first, Yetunde thought Ayodele would understand. After all, she had just given birth to their child, and the changes in her body were a natural part of becoming a mother. She believed he would support her through it all, just as he had supported her during the pregnancy. But Ayodele's attitude soon changed. He began to make hurtful comments about her weight, saying things like, "You have let yourself go," or "You should do something about how you look," which hurt Yetunde as she didn't expect him to say things like that. Ayodele, who had once been so loving and caring, started to pull away. He no longer smiled at her the way he used to, and their once playful conversation became brief and cold. There were times when he would avoid speaking to her altogether. He found reasons to leave the house, claiming he had work or errands to run, and began avoiding spending time with her. When Yetunde suggested going out, he would make excuses, like he isn't feeling well or they should try and stop spending money unnecessarily, and she should focus on losing weight. Yetunde began to feel ashamed of her appearance. She spent hours in front of the mirror trying to figure out what she could change or fix. It felt as though the love she once felt for Ayodele was fading, and her confidence dropped as she struggled to accept the changes in her body. Yetunde tried everything she could think of to fix things. She dressed up, cooked Ayodele's favorite meals, and even apologized for things that weren't her fault, hoping to win back his affection. But Ayodele's behavior only grew worse. His distance wasn't just emotional. He started staying out late, meeting up with friends and spending time with other young, attractive women. When Yetunde tried to reach him during the day, calling or texting, he would ignore her messages or respond with short, cold replies. The love and care she used to feel from him were gone, replaced by coldness and irritation. One day, their son, Damilare, fell ill with a high fever. Yetunde was terrified and did everything she could to comfort him. As she was deeply worried, she repeatedly called Ayodele, desperate for him to come home and help. Hours went by, and after many calls, he finally answered. Yetunde begged him to come home, telling him that their son needed treatment. Instead of showing concern, Ayodele yelled at her and hung up the phone. The shock of his cold response left Yetunde feeling even more alone, as the man she had once loved now seemed unreachable and uncaring. She managed to do some homemade remedies to reduce Damilare's fever, which worked. Later that night, Ayodele came home very angry. Without asking any questions, he accused Yetunde of ruining his evening, yelling that she was useless and couldn't handle anything on her own. Yetunde, feeling a mix of fear, tried to explain Damilare's condition, but Ayodele wasn't listening. Instead, he shouted at her and even began to beat her. Damilare, who was still a year old, called out to his father, crying, but Ayodele's face twisted with anger and he yelled at the boy. Ayodele didn't stop there. He threw Yetunde and Damilare out of the house, ignoring their cries and pleas. He carelessly tossed their few belongings onto the doorstep, leaving them with nothing but pain and confusion. As they stood there in the cold, Yetunde couldn't believe what had just happened. The man she had married, the father of her child, had become someone she no longer recognized. The weather was windy and rain poured heavily as Yetunde and her son walked through the streets, shivering from the cold. She took a wrapper from their belongings to cover Damilare, and Yetunde held him close, trying to shield him from the rain. But there was little she could do to protect him. Her heart ached as Damilare's fever returned, and it was worse. Feeling helpless, she kept praying silently that it would be okay. They eventually found an abandoned hut to shelter in for the night. With the last bit of money she had, Yetunde bought food and medicine for Damilare on their way, which wasn't enough. She fed him and gave him the medication while trying to smile for his sake, though her heart was heavy with worry. After petting him to sleep in her arms, she prayed for his recovery, hoping the worst was over. Yetunde lay awake, crying quietly throughout the night, overwhelmed by the weight of her situation. She had no idea what to do next. She couldn't go back to her grandmother's place, not with the shame she felt about what had happened. She didn't want to be a burden, and she feared the disappointment her grandmother would feel. All she had now was her son, and she wasn't sure where to turn for help. The next morning, Damilare was getting a bit better. and with nowhere else to turn, Yetunde called her brother, Dapo, who lives in the city, telling him about her situation and pleading with him not to tell their grandmother. She asked him to allow her to stay with him for a while. Dapo agreed to take them in and sympathized with his sister, ensuring that he would always be there for her. Dapo was angry after hearing what Ayodele did to Yetunde. He went back to the village to see Ayodele at his shop. He confronted him about what he did to his sister, which led to a fight between them, and they were separated by the villagers. Simi, Dapo's wife, who was very nice to Yetunde from the start, just changed overnight. She was far from welcoming. From the moment Yetunde and Damilare arrived, Simi made it clear that she saw them as a burden. She muttered under her breath about extra mouths to feed, and immediately she gave them a tiny room at the back of the house. And every meal came with a side of insults from Simi. Despite the harsh treatment, Yetunde didn't argue. She was shocked by the treatment she received from someone very nice to her before she got married, and who helped her with the care of her baby after birth, just turned against her. Not knowing all her caring attitudes were fake. Dapo, her brother, would intervene all the time in an attempt to stop his wife from scolding Yetunde or being rude to her, which sometimes ended in arguments between him and his wife. Yetunde kept her head down and focused on taking care of Damilare, knowing that her son needed her strength. Days turned into weeks, and Yetunde began to feel the weight of her situation. She couldn't stay in her brother's home forever, especially with the growing tension between her and Simi. Yetunde knew she had to find a way to support herself and Damilare. So, she began taking on any job she could find, cleaning houses, doing laundry, and even cooking for people in their homes and on occasion. It was hard work, but she pushed through, determined to provide for her son and build a better future. She began to lose weight due to all the suffering and stress, but she didn't see it as anything again. No matter how difficult the path ahead might be, she was going to make it. Yetunde saved every coin she could. Her focus was always on giving Damilare a better life. One day, Yetunde's luck began to change. One of her clients, impressed by her cooking skills, recommended her to a wealthy family in the city. The family needed a chef, so they arranged to meet with Yetunde and test her skills in their home. When Yetunde arrived, she was very nervous, but she gave it her best. The family welcomed her and instructed her on the dishes to be made. After tasting Yetunde's dishes, they hired her immediately. They were impressed by how fast and neat she was. Yetunde poured her heart into the cooking, and it paid off. Not only did she earn their admiration, but they also came to trust her completely. Yetunde worked for the family for 5 months. Seeing her dedication and talent, the family decided to sponsor Yetunde. They provided her with the resources to open a cooking class, where she taught others the art of cooking in the city, training them to be the best chefs to cook anywhere. As her business began to flourish, she gained more confidence in herself. She decided to move out of her brother's place and get a place. Simi demanded that she pay them for the time she had spent in the house, seeing that Yetunde had gained a bit of wealth, and Yetunde gave her the little she had. Yetunde got a nice place to stay and was able to take very good care of her child and also enroll him in a school. People in the village began to talk about her as news about her food academy spread. Some said she had bewitched the family that helped, while some accused her of stealing from them. As they were envious of her success, she began to grow and news about her wealth spread. Her journey from hardship to success wasn't easy, but with hard work and determination, Yetunde had built a new life for herself and Damilare. 3 years later, Yetunde had completely transformed her life. She was the proud owner of the best cooking school in town and was finally able to give Damilare the comfortable life he deserved. While the scars of her past still lingered, they no longer defined her. She had risen from the ashes of her struggles, stronger and more determined than ever. One day, as she was in one of her cooking classes, Yetunde received a call from an unknown number, only to hear Ayodele's voice. He began apologizing, asking for forgiveness. Yetunde felt no need to listen to him. She was pained to hear him speak. The man who had once broken her heart was no longer a part of her life. She immediately called the call, but Ayodele didn't stop there and began calling her several times with different numbers. She had worked too hard to rebuild her life, and the last thing she needed was to be dragged back into the past by someone who had hurt her so deeply. She turned off her phone and continued her work. Ayodele, however, was relentless. He sent Yetunde messages, showed up at her cooking school, and even asked her brother to beg her on his behalf. Ayodele had lost everything. His business crumbled and he had to sell his shops because he wasn't able to buy goods in them. His savings quickly ran out, and the friends who once filled his days slowly disappeared. The girls he used to go out with no longer answered his calls. Alone in his small, empty apartment, Ayodele found himself yearning for the comfort and support of his family, hoping they would return and help him rebuild his life. One evening, as Yetunde was approaching her home in her car, she noticed a man standing in front of her house, trying to get to her. To her shock, it was Ayodele again. He dropped to his knees, pleading for her to take him back, claiming he had lost everything: his business, his friends, his life, and needed her and their family. Yetunde didn't bother coming out of the car and just looked at him through the window. She stood her ground, feeling no pity for him. He had abandoned her when she needed him most, and now he wanted to return to her life after everything he had put her through. As Ayodele's words grew more aggressive, claiming he had made her who she was, he claimed that if he hadn't left her, she wouldn't have made it as she has now. Yetunde remained calm. She knew her strength had come from within, not from him. She had rebuilt her life from the ground up, and he had no place in it anymore. Without any word, Yetunde winded up the window of her car and drove away, leaving Ayodele kneeling in the dirt. She had no room for him in the life she had fought so hard to build without him. Yetunde returned home that evening, feeling a deep sense of relief. The weight of the past, the pain, and the uncertainty had finally lifted. That night, as she tucked Damilare into bed, her past no longer had any control over her. It was behind her. Just as the saying goes, every rose has its thorn. The joy of childbirth is always followed by different changes, which are normal and should not be seen as something bad, but as something that can be worked on.